Hi, I'm Julie Nelson. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator at Great Rivers United Way, and welcome to Coffee and Conversation. This episode is about mobile money, Venmo, Melio, Google Pay, Apple Pay, what's safe, what's not, how do you use it, how user-friendly is it? Lots of information I think you're going to find very useful. So let's get right to it.
Thanks, Julie. Bob Spencer here. Just to introduce myself, I've been in IT since I would say 5 years old when my grandmother asked me to change the clocks in her car because she couldn't figure out how to do that. And I've been advising people on technology ever since. And so I was asked to come here and talk on the topic today, just as a general IT consultant technologist here. And I have with me Stephanie Campbell from US Bank. Stephanie, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks. Well, one thing I've already learned is that I should have invited more of my family members to join the call. So I know I am Stephanie Campbell. I am the digital lead for US Bank. And so I cover what we call the central division. So my role as a digital lead is really to help US Bank get our best-in-class mobile app and online banking products, as well as educate our employees around those products so that they can educate our customers to that mobile app and online banking adoption. So lots of ins and outs that go with that. I have been in banking for a little over 11 years. My degree is actually in digital filmmaking, though, so lots of digital stuff going on in my background, but absolutely love working for the bank and happy to be here today.
Thanks, Steph. So we have put together a PowerPoint presentation to kind of talk through some of the topics. As I've heard from all of you on what you were kind of here for, I'll probably spin off a little bit from that PowerPoint and talk on a couple other points that we hadn't planned for, just to help kind of direct it at some of those areas and share a little bit more information to help us all understand where it's at. So I'm going to share my screen here. And one thing, if you would like with Zoom, is you should see this the screen here on your left, but also all the participants on the right. And one thing I sometimes suggest is there is a bar in between those two areas that you can move to the center, making the PowerPoint a little smaller and making the people a little bigger. And it really helps engage some of the conversation that we can have with this. So the agenda of our presentation is to go through a couple of areas, and we'll definitely add on to this to address some of the specific things that people brought up as why they wanted to be here. And as Julie said at the beginning, and what this is entitled, is about having conversation. So our point of the presentation is to share some information, but at any point, if anybody has questions, wants to speak up, ask us to go deeper into any specific areas, we're absolutely happy to do so. We've also left plenty of time towards the end for questions and conversations so we can talk through many more things. But for the agenda, we're going to kind of talk about physical payment options, some of the things that you would do in a store or when you normally would be paying somebody in person, talking through those technical options and some of the security around it. We're also talking about P2P, which is peer-to-peer payment options, which are really specifically for individuals to individuals, but have a breadth of options out there on what can be done for nonprofits, businesses, and the like. And then, of course, touching on security around those, and then discussing any questions that you may have. So physical payments. Steph, you want to kind of start with this, talking about the history of payments and where things have been before the digital age?
Absolutely, yeah. So as we all know, right, cash was where it all started. So cash is still great for in-person transactions if you want to pay quick and fast, if you have that in your pocket. But how many of us have that anymore? It also requires physical transport to deposit. There's not a digital tool that you can deposit or withdraw cash from, even if you're working or thinking about an ATM, right? You have to drive and go to that ATM in order to do that. And then one of the turnoffs, I would say, to cash is there's really no recovery if it's lost. Yeah, there's no tracking on it, but that means there's no recovery on it as well. So if you drop your wallet, you have $200 in there, that's, you know, unfortunately, that's probably gone. And so, yeah, no recovery on that.
Hey, Stephanie.
The next thing
Stephanie,
is,
I'm going to ask you to pause just a little second. We're not hearing you as clearly as we could be, so I don't know what could help. Bob, you're the
is that any better?
Try it one more time, Steph. Go ahead.
Let me see if I put it up to my ear, is that any better?
Yes.
All right, my headset didn't like me. Okay. Hopefully, I'm getting a lot of background noise, but hopefully that's a little bit better. So yeah, so cash is, you know, great for those quick in-person transactions if you have that cash in your pocket. But again, there are some downfalls to that as well. Checks are convenient but insecure. This is one of the things that I really, for lack of a better term, preach to my customers all of the time. A lot of us still use checks to send out, you know, bill payments or pay a babysitter or whatever that may look like. But all of your personal information is included in those check lines. So your account number, your routing number, everything that a scammer would need to access your bank account is right there on the check. And then now checks are even less secure because that MICR line, where that routing and account number is, it doesn't take a special type of ink or embossing any longer. It's all done electronically, so it can just be printed and used. So I know a lot of people are still using checks out there, and that is one of my my big pain points that I talk to customers about all the time is really, if we're talking safety and security, that's one of the least safe ways to make payments nowadays. So I will pause and see if there's any questions around cash or check. All right, Bob, go ahead.
So going from that physical paper copy of cash and checks on where we've existed for many, many years, then debit cards and credit cards started popping up, and that was really the start of electronic transactions. Because when you swipe that credit card, all of those transactions of cash are happening between accounts in the background, electronically between computers, and no more is there a physical thing that you're exchanging with people. So going back to the credit card days, I mean, many of us remember the good old days of having to use that raised carbon copy and making a physical copy of the card to do that transaction. Then with the magnetic stripe that they added onto credit cards on the back, that ultimately transmits the information on the card to the computer, but it's a lot of those card readers act like keyboards, really fast typing keyboards, and that's what that magnetic stripe is. I learned this many years ago, and I was really surprised as I bought myself my own magnetic stripe reader to hook up to my keyboard, and I could open it up, swipe some of my credit cards, and it would just type there on the screen. My name, my account number, all of this stuff was just typed out on the screen. Now, a lot of good credit card processors will encrypt that data as it's being transmitted, but ultimately, it's how it's written on the card that there is still some insecurity with that. And because of that, that's when the credit card companies started adding these chips onto their card, which you can see a picture there on the right-hand side. Those are a way of transmitting data, but it's a two-way communication with the credit card machine. And what it actually does is rather than send your credit card information over the transaction, it generates a unique credit card number, essentially, that the computer knows in the back end ties to your account. But that number that's being transmitted can only be used once, which makes counterfeiting of credit cards nearly impossible if you're using those chips. So as a business owner or somebody who accepts credit card payments, you may have seen or talked to your credit card processors over the last couple of years. And if your client uses that chip, it's a lower transaction rate than if you type it in manually or swipe the magnetic stripe. And it may just be a few cents per transaction, but the reason for that is because it reduces the ability of fraud on those transactions and costs the credit card companies less in their insurance costs in the back end and the fraud. After the invention of that, we've come to the generation we're in right now, which we're talking about contactless payments. So what do we mean by contactless payments? This would be something that you may have seen on a credit card machine where it looks like kind of a Wi-Fi signal. But ultimately, you can take your phone or your watch, if you have it set up, and hold it up against the machine without actually touching it, but you can touch it. And it transmits that data from your secure device to the credit card machine using the same technology on the back end as those chip-based transactions. It's one transaction number per transaction, so it can't be replicated and counterfeited. And they've even started building that ability into a lot of your new credit cards. So if you look at the picture here on the right, you may notice on some of your credit cards that little symbol with waves on it. If you see that, you actually can use that card to just touch it to many credit card machines rather than insert it or swipe it. And a lot of new cards are coming out with that option. And I've seen many cards also removing that magnetic stripe, so there isn't that option at all anymore. So, yeah, go ahead, Dan.
I might be jumping ahead, but is this vulnerable to somebody with a reader coming near you and being able to capture your information?
No, because it's only capturing the information during the transaction. So if somebody comes and captures that information is good for a millisecond of time while the transaction is actively taking place with those credit card machines. It does mean that the credit card machine does have to be connected to either the credit card company's servers. And so if the internet is down or something like that, those transactions actually will not process. You can't take them offline and you have to go back to the old method of manually collecting their card number if there is no internet connection. But if they did read that information off of your card, they would have literally seconds or less to actually process a transaction. And usually after the transaction, it needs that same card's next number, which it will not get. So in terms of the physical space around it, I'm not aware of any technology yet that the hackers are using and scammers are using that have been able to clone that information off of a credit card for fraud.
Good, thank you.
So, Bob, is it any safer to use that touchless thing as opposed to the chip, or doesn't it matter?
I would say it generally does not matter. The transaction, how it's happening in the background, is using the same general technology and the same security systems. It's just the way that the machine is communicating with the card. And so it's kind of like saying, am I using an external keyboard or am I using the one on my laptop? They're still essentially the same. There really is no different. It's more of what can the machine handle? And that's why most cards have both options on there, as some vendors just have not upgraded to readers that can do the wireless. So talking about just some of the options out there of if I want to use something like that, which vendors should we work with? Most contactless payment that we're going to be talking about today will be off of the vendors themselves that work with your mobile phone. That is the most common software version of these payment options, which were really the precursors to credit card companies putting them actually into the individual cards. So you can still carry around your card and use that. Personally, I actually do most of my payments through Apple Pay on my Apple phone, where I'm just holding up either my watch or my phone to the reader, and the transactions work that way. And so these are all some of the players out there. There's also Microsoft Pay and Walmart Pay. I'll mention those. Walmart Pay is the same type of solution as all of these other ones. However, it works at Walmart and at Walmart only. And they do not accept Apple Pay, Google Pay, and Samsung Pay. That's one of the challenges out there in the market is the biggest retailer out there won't accept any of these payments because they want their own system. Nothing against that, but I generally find that in terms of adoption rates and ease of use, using proprietary systems are sometimes, they have their purpose if you're really engaged with that organization, but may not help if you still need something else to go with it. And I'm on more of convenience and comfort to use one system than having to try to figure out 20 different ways of doing something.
Well, then would you recommend Apple Pay and Google Pay is the most widely accepted of that bunch?
That's what I was getting to exactly. Which should I use?
Go for it.
So as I mentioned, those EMV chip payments are more secure than the magnetic stripe, and all contactless payments are as secure or more secure than those EMV chip payments. So I'm a full proponent of using those when it's available to you. And it's one of those, for most people, it's going to be more devastating and less likely that they're going to lose their cell phone than they are their wallet. Because most people, at least of the millennial generation of 40 and unders, put more value into carrying around their phone than their wallet. And the security around that when you're doing it on your phone is actually really secure. There's multi-levels of technology and encryption that you have to get through in order to activate these things. So if I lose my phone, you can't pick it up off the street and use it to pay with credit card information. All of that requires some additional information, either my facial recognition, my fingerprint, a passcode only I know. Those type of things keep that information secure on your devices. So in terms of what should I use, Apple Pay, Google Pay, Samsung Pay. These are all recommended equally, and it really comes down to what type of phone do you have. If you have an iPhone, Apple Pay is the vendor to use. If you have an Android phone, Google Pay is good. Samsung Pay is kind of a subsidiary, if you would, of Google Pay, simply because it only works on Samsung Galaxy phones. They tried to have their own market. So any phone that you can use Samsung Pay on, you can also use Google Pay on. So it's probably going to come down to one of those two vendors that you'd most likely use if you want to utilize this. And really, it comes down to both security and convenience when it comes to those type of systems. So at this point, I'm going to throw out a poll before we get through the end of this one and ask a question to everybody. And I'll launch it, Julie.
Okay.
Have you used your phone to pay for items at a store? So I generally just want to know, is this brand new to everybody here, or are some people familiar with this process? And just get a sense of where the next part of the conversation can go. Give it a few more seconds to finish up everybody's voting. Yep, looks like we got everybody in. And it looks like about a third of the people here have used it in some capacity before. For those that have, does anybody want to speak up on why you started using it, the convenience of it, why you like using it? So if anyone wants to share their thoughts.
I guess I would share that the moment that I really truly bought into it, even knowing all of the safety and security, it was just one day I was out for a walk. I was walking my dog and I had my cell phone with, and I developed a craving for chips and salsa. And I was right near Quillen's. I live in the Crescent, and I walked in and I used my phone to pay. And I just thought, I don't carry my whole purse with me when I go to walk the dog, but I always have my phone. And just knowing, having that security, the convenience, it's such a safe way to pay that I use it all the time. Anywhere that accepts it, I'll use it.
Great, that's a great story.
I'm kind of in the same boat. I was in Colorado visiting my kids, and we were walking around, and I was super hungry or thirsty, one of the two. And I found a vending machine, and I was like, hey, I have Samsung Pay on my phone. And ever since then, I've kind of started using it a little bit more. And also nowadays with the contactless feature, it's even better than a plastic, because you just kind of wave it, so you don't touch the machine at all. and neither does, your phone.
That's a very good point, Mary. And in today's world, that's where a lot of this conversation came from, is the idea of contactless payments, both person to person, person to business. What's possible out there, and would using some of these things keep us a little bit safer, a little bit healthier?
I have a question.
Sure.
I just got out of 7 weeks at a care center. I'm on crutches and I broke my wrist. But I mentioned elastic shoelaces, and shortly after that, I got an ad for elastic shoelaces. Who is listening? Is government listening? Are businesses listening? How secure is our online presence?
The security around your online presence is a factor mostly on the settings and awareness that you have. So without knowing exactly where you are, what devices were around you, all that kind of stuff, I couldn't answer that question. Most devices that I'm aware of, and it all comes down to reading the fine print with a lot of those services and items that you buy. I know people joke all the time of, okay, did I read the terms of service when I signed up for this app or when I signed up for this phone? And nobody wants to read through 50 pages of legalese to try to figure out those details. But one thing I do anytime I'm looking for something and looking at something, I will go out to Google and look for 5 or 6 reviewed articles around that, and using the words safety, security. When you have a lot of people out there in the community doing this type of research, looking for that fine print for you, a lot of times if there is something concerning in there, they will bring it up to the forefront of knowledge, and then they can point you to something specific in there, and you can go verify yourself within those terms. Hey, was this somebody making something up, or is this, oh, it actually is written in there, it's a concern. So a lot of times it's, do you have speech recognition turned on some of your devices? And if it's a Google device, Google will say they'll use your speech recognition items. If it's interacting with your phone, it's tied to your same personal account for Google Ads. And that may be what it was. Simply Google heard the word shoelace and started targeting their ads to it. So when it comes to the advertising, Google owning both the device and the advertising, they do keep it relatively in-house, and it's not something that a human could really tie to you. It's machine learning saying that that might be something that you'd be interested in. It may just be a Google search that you're going for, or you happen to click on an ad around that same type of topic. I'm shopping for something on Amazon. I'm going to get advertisements for it using like the Chrome browser or anything, unless you're actively going in and turning off these features. They say a lot of consumers see it as an enhancement value, not a privacy concern.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
So talking through these next areas, peer-to-peer payments, or P2P, this is the next area that a lot of you came here to hear about, the Venmos and some various other things. So peer-to-peer payments are transactions that can be used for anything from splitting a dinner bill between friends, to paying your rent, to anything you would use cash or a check for to give to another individual. That's what this is really designed for. So it's allowing for payments of funds between 2 parties, linking to your existing banking accounts, debit cards, and or credit cards, and sending that information either through an app or through a text. And really, they're becoming much more popular, especially because you don't have, in the age of COVID, you don't have any physical interaction that you have to deal with. So also want to note, P2P is peer-to-peer, or some people refer to it as person-to-person payments. Some examples of these peer-to-peer options and companies. PayPal kind of was the first one. It's the precursor, the grandfather to a lot of these apps that we have today, where you could pay somebody over the internet and anybody could get an account. You didn't have to be a registered vendor or pay monthly fees in order to accept credit card transactions, like was the normal before PayPal Online. Other companies that we'll talk about a little bit, Zelle, Venmo, Square Cash, and even Facebook Messenger has payment transfer options. I'll also point out that Google Pay, Samsung Pay, and Apple Pay have peer-to-peer options in their software as well. So as a Apple Pay user, I can text somebody $40 if they also have Apple Pay, and it will send it right from my debit card to their Apple Pay account, and that money can be spent at a store or downloaded into their bank account. So they also have those capabilities, but we're not going to touch on those too much here because we are talking more about some of those third-party options. And with a lot of those Google Pay and Apple Pay, you can only do it. So Apple Pay, I can only send that to somebody else who has an iPhone. I could not send it to somebody who had an Android phone. These other third-party options allow both. So really, how do these work? Peer-to-peer payment accounts are typically relatively simple to set up. And whichever platform you choose, you sign up for an account, then you'll link either your bank account or a debit card to that, and that's how the transactions will take place. Sending and receiving money is usually just a couple clicks. So you choose who you're sending money to. You usually have a contact list or can search for somebody based on a phone number, email address, and or a specific username. And depending on which payment service you use, the time it takes for that money to transfer from your account to their account can be anywhere from a few seconds to up to 5 business days. And so that transaction time may be some of the choices that affect which ones you choose to utilize. Stephanie, you want to talk a little bit on just some of the benefits of peer-to-peer payments?
Absolutely, yeah. So I will definitely talk about, ease of use and convenience and speed. If you think about, these peer-to-peer payments and how fast it is they're already in whatever app or payment service you're using, you can just add them to your contact list. They're already in your phone for that contact. So whether you're using their email address or their phone number, it's so easy to just import that. Just as somebody brought up earlier, I forgot my wallet at home. It doesn't have to be an excuse anymore. Or if I will use a personal story. I moved from Arkansas at the beginning of this year, and all of my siblings, I'm the youngest of 4, still live at home around my parents. And I thought, well, if I'm moving to South Dakota at the beginning of the year, I'm no longer going to have to purchase everything for family holidays and make sure my mom's birthday gift gets there on time. And I was wrong. I am still doing all of that for all of my siblings. And so these person-to-person payments are so easy because I'll buy it, I'll ship it, it's done, it's handled. And then I just text my siblings and say, you owe me this amount of money. You can Zelle or Venmo or whatever that option is. And within seconds, I have that money back in my account. So that ease of use and that convenience is really that selling factor for these type of payments. There's also, it's a lot better than having to grab money out of an ATM, right? You're not having to hassle and worry about cash, worry about receipts. Everything is logged for you. Since you're using your bank account information, whether it's tied to your debit, your credit card, or your bank account, all of those transactions show up on your bank account statement. So it is right there for you as proof that those payments went through. In fact, several of those options even show the name of the recipient within your bank account statement. So that does show up of who you sent the money to with a lot of those different payment services. There are some service charge and some fees to certain apps that you may use or certain payment services. Not all of them have that. Some are free and some do charge. So it just kind of depends. And again, in a little bit, we'll talk about, which one you should choose depending on your certain circumstances. Right now, these are being used by 62% of adults. So I think that that's also really a testament to the times that we're in, right? COVID has changed the way that we as consumers, that we as customers are buying and paying for not only merchandise, but how we're interacting with other services. I'm now using my preference is Zelle. You'll hear a lot about that in a little while, but I am now using Zelle to pay my dog groomer. I pick them up, it's contactless, I drop them off, and then I Zelle that money to the dog groomer. So it's becoming so popular that you're hearing things instead of I'll pay you back or I'll get you that money, I'll Venmo you, I'll PayPal you, I'll Zelle you that money. It's becoming part of our lingo, and so I think that's another just testament to the times and how convenient it is.
Thanks, Stephanie. And so there are some concerns that some people want to raise, and I want to touch on some of the most common ones. So while P2P services are generally secure, there's always risks involved when you're doing money transactions. The most common would be accidentally sending money to the wrong user, wrong person, or needing to send more money than the application allows for. A lot of these apps do have limits on how much can be sent in a time period. And also, a lot of the default security settings in these apps are more for ease of use, but aren't necessarily the absolute most secure that you can make them. And it's really up to your level of preference on where you want your security level to be. So the biggest issue really comes from that accidentally sending money to the wrong user. And when people say, well, that's why I don't want to use these apps, I'm really concerned about that. I ask them, is that risk any different than putting $20 cash in an envelope and sending it through the mail? The risk of loss is actually greater of physically sending cash than it would be through something like this. And also, a lot of times, if you this process allows for verification. A lot of these apps will ask you if you've never paid this person before. Well, do you know this person's last 4 digits of their phone number or something about them to verify this is the person I want to send it to? And also your own passwords that you set up, your own PINs, those are also part of that security puzzle that if you're using some good technology practices of having a secure password, using a password that you're not using on other sites, really lowers that risk down to a very negligible level. So ultimately, the risks that come with using these types of apps are things to be mindful of, but shouldn't necessarily stop you from using this easy way to pay. So I wanted to talk through some of the pros and cons on a lot of these vendors. So I'm going to kind of punch through some of these real quick on just some of the high points and the low points. So PayPal, being the original peer-to-peer vendor, grew up with eBay, and they are really still very business focused and less of a person-to-person individual transfer here. We keep them in this peer-to-peer category because anybody can sign up for a PayPal account, but it is really focused on almost a vendor-customer relationship than it is a person-to-person. PayPal is still great for doing things like fundraisers. They have some discounts for nonprofits. Having a link on your site to sell things, PayPal is still really a really useful way to do it. But it's still primarily based transactions. And ultimately, PayPal started developing an app and realized we can't compete in this market of real individual peer-to-peer markets. So back in 2013, they actually purchased Venmo, and PayPal owns Venmo. And that is where they are putting all of their energy on the peer-to-peer transactions. So talking about Venmo, that's the next one I wanted to talk about. It's very easy to send money. You really only have to exchange usernames. Originally, a lot of these apps said you either needed to know somebody's email address or their phone number, and people didn't want to share that information with other people just to receive a payment. So they added in usernames so you can search by any of those options. There's also a nice feature that's called a QR code. It's a 2D barcode that you can put on your business card. You can put up on a wall saying, if you want to send me money, here's a little picture of me, and people will use their Venmo app to scan that, and it knows, it puts that information of who you're sending the money to, and it makes that transaction happen. So receiving money with Venmo, and this is one of the concerns that some people have, is it goes into your Venmo balance. So somebody sends you money. I sent my dad $50 the other day. How long does it sit there before it actually gets in his bank account? And the answer is until he goes into the app and asks for it to be downloaded. At that point, it takes between 1 and 3 business days. So it's not an instant money to your bank account, but it is instant money that he could then Venmo to somebody else. Venmo is also the only major service that has a social network attached to it. So by default, those transactions on Venmo are public. And so if you send money to somebody else, you can see a feed of all of your friends, all of your contacts who sent money to other people and what they're spending money on. You have an option of turning that off, of sharing only with your friends or sharing with nobody those transactions. And it's really up to you. A lot of people like the social aspect, seeing, oh, that dog groomer accepts Venmo payments. I now know that because of the social network. But if you don't want to share that information of who you're sharing money with among your friends, you can absolutely turn that off. Also, Venmo does have an initial weekly limit of $300 for transactions that you can send until you verify some information. And all of the apps have some sort of regulation on this. So you can set it as high as $5,000 per week that you can send Venmo transactions with. Most of them, it's an unlimited receive, but you can't send more than that amount of money in a period of time. So it really is for a lot of those smaller transactions where it's most commonly used. Going and buying a new car with Venmo isn't something that's going to happen. But sending $50 here and $100 there and $20 there is really convenient. Also to note, Venmo has just released a Venmo for Business, where you can have a Venmo account and an account for your business. The main reason they've separated that is in their terms of service, it is not something that you should be exchanging for goods or services on their accounts. Because it's all free, it's basically, from a cash standpoint, there's a lot of those business type transactions where a credit card company needs to charge 1.9% or something along those lines. And Venmo for Business will separate that out and also allow you for separate reporting, keeping your personal transactions separate from any business transactions, just from an accounting and a tax standpoint as well. Square Cash is another big player in the market. This is actually the first peer-to-peer app that I ever started using. It also has usernames rather than email addresses and phone numbers. And it's very similar to Venmo. Originally, it was a debit card only service, and so it was always free. They did recently add in credit cards. And I'll take a moment here to mention this. With any of these services, if you're tying it to a bank account or a debit card, it's usually free. If you're tying the transactions to a credit card, there's usually a transaction fee that the banks can't get around and the companies can't get around, that they have to pass those charges on to you. So with a lot of these things, think debit card before you think credit card in terms of for those peer-to-peer payments. And just like Venmo, Square Cash sits in that cash balance until you manually transfer it to a bank account. So it's very similar to Venmo. It's just a different player in the market. So I kind of refer to it kind of like VHS and Betamax back in the 80s. Two very good products that both do very similar things. It's just a question of user adoption on who wants to use what product and which ones stay viable as companies.
I have another security question, if I could.
Sure, Dan.
I have PayPal, and it's connected to my Ultra Visa debit card. If someone were to get my password, could they drain my HELOC, which should be stealing my house?
They could do transactions if they got your password, if they got your login, and usually there's now an option to make sure you have a multi-factor authentication turned on. So they'd also have to get your phone, and if it sent you a text message, or also have access to your email. So protecting that doorway is really the best way to do security. But it also depends on your relationship with those banks and what protections they have against fraudulent charges. I can't speak to any specific bank or account type, but talk to your banker about some of those concerns, and I'm sure they can address a lot of those. And if any of the ladies here from Ultra wanted to touch on that, you're welcome to do so. Just in terms of fraudulent charges. But moving on, Zelle is another one that is now actually, in terms of volume, one of the largest players in the market. Zelle was developed as a partnership through a number of major banks, including Bank of America, Chase, and Citi. Although if your bank doesn't support it, you can also sign up as an individual user with their standalone app. Some of the processes are a little bit different if you choose to do that. But it also means Zelle security measures, including your basic practices and how it works, two-factor authentication, depends on the bank and how they have chosen to implement Zelle. Most of them handle it really well, but there may be some variations between various banks. Usually it's also the easiest to set up out of all of these, because when it is partnered with your bank, you simply have to say, I want to use Zelle, and your bank already has all of the account information, your debit card information, that transaction background information that you would have to enter in to Venmo or Cash when you're signing up for it. Zelle already has that because it's tied to your bank. Also, if there's any spending limits, that is set by the bank, but if you use it independently, it is a $500 a week spending limit within Zelle. I went through Zelle's website and also pulled this list of local banks that utilize Zelle. So if you're a banker at any of those institutions, it may be something that you want to talk to your banker about to see if it's something you want to use. At this point, I'll hand it over to Stephanie to talk a little bit deeper about Zelle and its features and benefits, because I will be honest, I signed up for Zelle myself just a couple of weeks ago to make myself familiar with it in this presentation, but had not used it before.
No problem. Yeah, I would love to talk a little bit about how Zelle works. So Zelle is going to be one of those payment services that really gives you a little bit more peace of mind, in my opinion. Again, I'm the advocate for Zelle here, but it's because it does tie back to your bank, and your bank really owns that information. It's not a third-party processor as long as you're using it within your bank. So if your bank supports it, most likely it's already within your bank's app, and then they set up the security and standards for that. So again, I'm with US Bank, so I will talk about that security a little bit. And I know that it varies across the board, but most of the banks use certain authentication factors when you enroll in Zelle. So not only when you enroll in Zelle, will your bank reach out to the carrier that your phone is with to match, is this person's name on the cell phone plan, as well as the Zelle account, as well as the bank account. So it's really authenticating you as that sender. It'll also check IP addresses. So if you happen to send a Zelle payment while you're in Mexico to somebody, you may get a pop-up notification that says, are you sure you want to send this? We noticed you're not, at your regular place, you're out of country. So there's going to be some other authentication factors that your bank can add in there to make sure that it's very secure. And so a little bit different of how this Zelle works compared to the competitor apps that we've talked about today, Square Cash and Venmo and others, is Zelle works within minutes. So as long as you're enrolled in Zelle and the other user at the other end is enrolled in Zelle, or their bank supports that, the money is transferred in minutes. So the illustration here is John owes Steve $5 for a burger, right? John sends $5 via Zelle. John's bank transfers $5 from that bank to Steve's bank, and Steve has it within his bank account within minutes, right? Normally, I will say when I Zelle people money, they have it within their account before the email comes through to me saying, you just sent money. So it's already there. It's in their account. With competitor apps, it's up to those 3 to 5 business days. It really does depend. John sends that $5 to Steve. John's bank transfers $5 to Steve's payment app. So the bank transfers it to the Venmo app. That $5 sits and waits for Steve to take action to then transfer it from the payment app to the bank. Then that period of time before Steve has that $5 to spend. So really it is all about, and I think that's on the next slide, Bob, it's really about which one you should choose. It's going to be, what do your friends and family use? It is a popularity contest a little bit. We've talked a lot about the safety and security, but there's a lot of features that are within all of these. So it's going to be ease of use is really what are your friends signed up for, and how easy and convenient is it going to be for you to pay those. If your bank does support Zelle, you have a little bit of a better chance of getting a support of assistance, right? You can call your local banker. They can either help you or direct you to the person that can help you rather than, you know, trying to get a hold of somebody at Venmo or that type of company. So you have better assistance there. Zelle and Venmo are the two most popular. That will probably stay that way as their popularity even continues to rise. So last year, Zelle was used by more consumers than any other cash service in that realm. So yeah, nothing is preventing you from using one more than the other. Again, it really is that popularity contest. It really is how much you research and think about the safety and security of both. And I know Bob put this on there, but I would say the same thing. I always suggest testing the new service, right? With a trusted friend. Make sure, you know, see what they have. If they have Venmo, if they have Zelle, send them $1, have them send it back. We do that all the time at the bank, just to make sure that customers are you know, comfortable with the process and that they know how it works, and then they can understand you know, the safety and security features behind it.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Stephanie, is there any restrictions on, a lot of us are tied to a nonprofit organization that are involved in this discussion. Is there any restriction on nonprofit entities setting up their own Zelle account with their own financial institution, particularly if they already have an established relationship with one of those financial institutions that were listed?
So Stephanie, did you hear that question?
No, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
I can repeat it really, really quick. Is there any restriction with Zelle when it comes to business or transactions with business accounts or nonprofits who already have a relationship with these banks using Zelle instead of person to person, but more for some of those fundraising and or business transactions?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a great question. So Zelle does have the capability for the business to business or business to consumer. It is separate. A lot what Bob talked about earlier around how Venmo has the capability for business or vendors. Same thing with Zelle. Right now, the fees are waived with Zelle for business to business just because of, again, the COVID climate that we're in. But typically, there is a charge for the business part of Zelle. But there are no restrictions. So if you do have let's say a business account already set up with one of those banks that do support Zelle, that's a great option for you since all of the contacts would already be added, the safety and security is already there. And then again, most banks and Zelle itself are waiving those business fees right now for transacting. The other good news on that is a lot of banks don't actually charge for the receiving side. So if you want to send money, if you're a business and you're trying to send money, it's not going to, it's going to charge you a certain. I'm sorry. Other way around. If you're a business and you're receiving money, you are going to be charged a certain amount, right? That credit card, that cash purchasing fee. If you're sending money, you aren't going to be charged that. So that's another great feature with like Zelle, and I'm not sure if Venmo does that or not, but at least with Zelle, they're not charging businesses on that end. So it's only a one-way charge.
Thanks, Stephanie.
If I could just add to that too, I know not everybody would have this, but at Ultra, we have a service that we work with called NetGiver, and that's specifically for nonprofits so that you're not having to pay those credit card transaction fees. So if anybody, wanted more information on that, if you're already a, member at Ultra, we could certainly direct you to our website and just look at NetGiver, NetGiver. It's free and it's a great way to make donations to charities and nonprofits. I've used it myself so that they don't have to absorb that cost of that transaction. So there's starting to be more services out there like that too, so that nonprofits don't have to pay those fees because it's already hard enough to raise money without having to pay to raise money, right?
Thank you, Jennifer. That was one that I was not familiar with, and I will definitely be looking into that one more.
Great.
Jennifer, I definitely would like to do that because I want to offer a link on my website to donate to a charity. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the last thing we're going to touch on here, and I know we're running a little bit long or getting close to it, and we want to be available for questions as you need, but ultimately security. We've touched on this throughout, but I want to just reemphasize some of the key points. The transaction cards are more and more secure today than they have ever been. So having trust in the security of using the newer technology with your credit cards and mobile pays it's very secure and generally more secure than the physical payment controls. But ultimately, with any security, you control the weakest point of that security, whether it be physical security, protecting your device, keeping it under your control. That's the same as with cash. Setting up your passwords or PIN numbers and not reusing them. And that's probably my biggest point when it comes to passwords, is if you have a password that you use everything for your bank account, to logging into an online chat forum, to something else, using one password, if one of those companies' databases gets breached, there's a possibility that the hackers then try it on all of the other sites. So in terms of passwords, the most security you can do is having different passwords for different systems. And then ultimately, multi-factor information. You'll see this more and more as a requirement on a lot of sites, but this is where they send you an email saying, here's your confirmation number that you have to enter in order to complete this transaction. Or they'll send you a text message, or they'll give you a phone call. And doing that really verifies that you are who you are through some other channel rather than just knowing a password. And having that multi-factor is ultimately one of the best ways where any online security will protect you. Also on the back end, making sure you're reviewing your transactions with your bank account and with your apps. This transaction review process is really the best control that has always been with any banking to prevent and detect fraud. You know what you should have spent on. So if you see something unusual, raising a red flag and asking questions is usually the first sign of a problem. Also with that, a lot of these apps will let you know immediately as a transaction happens. So if somebody sends you money via Venmo and you have Venmo on your phone, it pops up an alert on the screen that lets you know, hey, somebody just sent you money. You should know about this. Or with all of my credit cards that I have their company apps on my phone as well. When I swipe my Discover card somewhere, my phone pops up an alert letting me know that I used my Discover card. All of those things help you be aware of your own transactions. And one last point when it comes to those card transactions, a lot of people are weary of using credit cards just because it can get you into debt, where a debit card will only allow you to spend up to the limit that you have. But credit cards actually offer more fraud liability protection than debit cards do. And it's much easier to recover something. So if you're purchasing something through a website or purchasing something where the card information might leave your hand and you're not using one of these chipped or secure transaction methods, I'd personally use a credit card over a debit card and keep that debit card there for ATM use, things that you're doing in person, or tied to one of these secured apps that add that extra layer of security. So with that, that was really what we wanted to talk through. Are there any questions from the group that they wanted to have us address?
I just wanted to address the question that from earlier as far as the fraud protection, from Ultra. And I guess one of the things I would mention that anybody that's a Visa, banking with a Visa shop is the Visa purchase alerts. They're usually free to the customer or member. And in our case, they're free. And I got mine set up so I get alerted every time my card gets used. And so, you can set a dollar limit, you can set parameters around it, but it is a really good tool, and it actually has protected me because all of a sudden I see a transaction and it's instant. So if you see something that isn't you can hop on it right away and take care of it. I think along with that, Visa fraud alerts, where there would be something that was out of character and they would alert you to it, and then you would have to either call or respond by text. And I think most of the financials would offer something like that, which I think is really, really good. But then to address what a gentleman asked about fraud protection, in our case, and I'm sure in US Bank's case, you call the fraud department, we'd verify it, give you the money back right away, probably ask you to get a new card, if somebody else used your card. And in our case, we have instant issues, so you could stop in an office. Sometimes, I think everybody knows, especially with COVID, mail time is kind of bad. So we can mail you a card, but stopping in is probably your best bet. So Just thought I'd mention that.
Thanks, Marion. That's a very good point. A lot of what I understand in terms of that fraud protection is it comes down to the timeliness on how fast you can report it. That is the biggest factor in there. So being aware of what's going on, reviewing your information, then working with your banks and financial institutions if there is a problem. Each organization has maybe something a little bit different, and talking to the individual organizations you work with is key in understanding what's best for you.
I have a question regarding events. So we put on a lot of events, and oftentimes we struggle with getting payment at the end of the night because most people carry, credit cards, debit cards, and things like that. What would you say is the best method for an event situation, whether you're doing a chicken queue, whether you're doing a silent auction, whether you're doing, something like that?
In my personal opinion, the best thing to use for an event like that is multiple things. So having multiple options available. I've worked with nonprofits a lot, and a lot of times it's what flexibility do you have? Do you want to be able to accept cash, checks? Those are usually easy to accept, and somebody just has to keep it secure. When it comes to credit card transactions, honestly, Square is still one of the easiest to sign up for, especially for nonprofits, relatively low fees, and you buy a little reader that attaches to your phone, so you can take those credit card transactions anywhere. So for the nonprofits that do those miscellaneous things, I've always advised something like Square. It's relatively low cost, it's convenient, and it's something that you can have multiple options with. But it's also maybe something that you want to look for services that offer this specific thing for a very small nominal fee. I know one Give Butter that I've used once or twice that aggregates a lot of this stuff together. You can accept Venmo through it. You can accept many different things. You can accept credit cards directly. It works with PayPal. As a nonprofit, it allows you to aggregate all of that together. The downside is those Venmo payments, they do charge 2% plus 30 cents for it. So even when normally it would be free person to person, they put a charge through it, and then they maybe do a small charge on top, like 1% for their services, but it makes that process easier. So there's lots of services out there that offer that type of option for events.
All right, great. Bob and Stephanie, oh my gosh, I learned stuff I didn't even know I didn't know. This has been fantastic. So that's our coffee and conversation on mobile money. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know I certainly got a lot out of it. And if you have any ideas for other topics that we might offer, go ahead and shoot me an email. I'm at jnelson@gruw.org. Have a great day.